Good evening and welcome. We're so glad that you could join us tonight. I'm Pastor Debbie with the Ellicott City Church. I'm one of the pastors here at our church, and we just want to welcome you. We hope that these few minutes here together this evening will help answer your questions tonight regarding the COVID vaccine. So this evening, we have a number of people here to present and to help us learn more about the vaccine. I wanted to let you know we'll be hearing from Maxine Charles. She's a nurse practitioner here in Howard County. Dr. Wilbur Chin is a professor with the University of the School of Medicine, has joined us tonight. Rhonda Jones will be giving her testimony. She is a nursing assistant and certified medicine aide with the Maryland Masonic Homes. Dr. Nia Leek is a physician with our Howard County General Hospital. Pastor Paolo Macena from Ellicott City Church is with us also tonight. And Dr. Albert Reese, he is the Dean of the University of the Maryland School of Medicine. Dr. Mara Rossman has joined us. She is a health officer from the Howard County government. And Pastor Gary Wimbish is with us tonight from the Columbia Community Center. So again, I'm Pastor Debbie Rivera, and I'm your moderator and host for this evening, and we're very thankful that you could join us tonight. So as we get started on in our meeting tonight, I wanted to let you know that our goal tonight is to give you an opportunity to interact with our presenters as well. So with that in mind, you'll see if you have joined us by Zoom that there is a section called Q&A. If you have any questions for our panelists tonight, please feel free to put those questions there in the Q&A. Please note that the chat will not be monitored for questions tonight. So look in the Q&A section when you are wanting to ask a question. Also, if you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, you are welcome to add your questions there in the comment sections below. Those will be monitored as well for your questions. As we continue tonight, we also are going to have a survey. It's a quick 3-question survey for you. We want to see how else can we help you and help our community. So if you would just take a couple of minutes and answer 3 quick questions for us, we want to see how we can move forward and be a part of making your life better here in Howard County. All right, it's not too late tonight to share the link. Go ahead, feel free to share that link. Your friends and family are welcome to join us. You can share on Facebook, on YouTube, or the Zoom link as well. All right, there's a list of resources available. We'd like you to have access to as many resources as possible. So if you have a minute, you can go to ellicotcity.church/vaccine. That link again is ellicotcity.church/vaccine. There you'll find a number of resources available to hopefully help you answer your questions. So this evening, we are going to go through a couple of different sections that we think will give you the pre-knowledge and hopefully answer some of your questions as we get started. So we'll be speaking with Dr. Rossman regarding the need for the vaccine. And then we will continue with Dr. Nia Leek with the science behind vaccines and how those work. And then after that, Dr. Reese and Dr. Chin will be speaking about the myths of the COVID-19 vaccine in particular, and our human response to this COVID crisis. Following that, we'll have a couple of testimonies, and then Pastor Gary will be giving us a guide for our personal decision making, because we know that the vaccine is a very personal decision, and it may be different, well, it definitely is different for each one of us. So we want to help you know how to make that decision. Following all of these sections, then we will open the Q&A, the question and answer time, and we hope that you will stay around and that you will be blessed and will be able to get your questions answered regarding the vaccine tonight. All right, at this time, we are going to begin with Dr. Rossman identifying the need. Dr. Rossman, the time is yours.
Thank you, Pastor Debbie. Delighted to be here and so happy to be able to spend these moments this evening with everyone. And so I'm Dr. Maura Rossman. I'm the health officer for Howard County Health Department. And we have some slides here to give you some background about the need. I think we all know the need, but we just want to review that. We can go to the next slide. So what's the impact of COVID on our community? As of today, this morning, we've had almost 16,000 confirmed cases. We know that that's an underestimate because if you all remember, almost a year ago, we didn't even have the ability to test people who were symptomatic. We were only able to test people that were in the hospital. So we know that far more than 16,000 Howard County residents have been affected, but at least these are cases that we now have confirmed laboratory data. We know that 1,252 of our community have been hospitalized, meaning they were pretty sick. This doesn't mean just at Howard County General, but this is across hospitals in Maryland. And unfortunately, the grim statistic that 222 of our friends, neighbors, and relatives have succumbed to this awful virus pandemic. Some good news, we had a tough winter, but our average positivity rate has decreased over the past several weeks. You can see on the slide that the number is 2.82%. In general, under 5% is considered good. I'd like it to see it even lower, but this is a promising trend. In addition, we use a number of different data statistics in addition to the positivity rate. But how many new cases do we have every day per 100,000? And today the number is 10. This is far better than where we were several weeks ago, but not at the place that we really need to be. But again, very promising that over certainly the past month that our trend data is looking good. Switching a little bit to, I think, why we're all here tonight is hearing about vaccination. As of today, almost 18% of Howard County residents have received at least one dose of vaccine. That means certainly we have more than 80% to go, but since the end of December when we started, we're slowly making progress. Our progress primarily is hindered by the lack of supply, which I'm sure we'll be hearing about more from others. I work for Howard County Health Department, and we've administered almost 22,000 first doses and 14,000 second doses. I want to talk a little bit about where you can get vaccine again, because I know that's on the minds of many people, and it's not just Howard County Health Department. So let's go a little bit forward. Next slide. So what do we need to know? Again, I think we all know this from living through this for the past years. Infection with SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus, causes COVID-19, which is the disease. And I think we all know that the disease can be very mild, actually so mild that some people have no symptoms at all, to quite severe in some people, causing hospitalization and even death. And unfortunately, we don't know exactly why some people become sicker from SARS-CoV than others. But we do know that adults over the age of 65 and others with medical conditions, also known as comorbidities, if you've heard that term, are more likely to become severely ill. So over the past year, I know all of us have been really trying to protect our loved ones who are over the age of 65 and those with chronic health conditions which make them at more risk of getting more severe illness, including death. You can go to the next slide, thanks. So this is some of the things that we've been hearing about. You've been hearing about these variant things. Well, many viruses mutate or change over time. It's one of the things that happens with flu vaccine and why each year we get a new flu shot because the virus changes. Well, SARS-CoV, the virus that causes COVID-19, more recently, I think we've heard about, has begun to mutate. We've heard about different variants in the UK, South Africa, and Brazil. And the concern here is that as they mutate, They may be more contagious. I think the scientists believe they are more contagious, meaning it's more easily spread. So more of us can become sicker at one time, not a good thing. And one thing that there's sort of debate about is whether or not you get sicker. But nonetheless, we don't like when the virus mutates and makes more of us sicker. The vaccines that we have right now, some have been studied, and we'll talk, I'm sure other of the presenters will talk about this. The Janssen or Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which has just been authorized, has been studied in areas where these variants have been located, but the other two vaccines have not. So we sort of don't know, but we're hoping for the best. And as we go on tonight, we'll also learn how effective these vaccines are. We can go to the next slide. So what are some of the symptoms? Again, cough, fever, loss of taste or smell, which is pretty unique, and shortness of breath or difficulty breathing. If you have any of these symptoms, you should get tested for COVID-19. And hopefully we all know by now, after a year, where we can go to get tested. Just as a reminder, again, if you think back to a year ago, when I think I said, even when we had people in the only people who could get tested were in the hospital, and then over time, testing became more and more available. And now, hopefully, I hope all of us know where we can go if we think we need to be tested. We can go to the next slide. So how is COVID-19 spread? I think we've learned predominantly that it's spread person to person, aerosolized and respiratory droplets. That's what makes wearing facial coverings or masks so important. I can't emphasize that. Why physical distancing, staying 6 feet apart is so important, because these aerosolized particles make it more difficult to spread if you're further apart. And why hand hygiene also important. And limiting gatherings among us, because the more people that get together, the more potential there is to spread to more of us. So I think we've all learned that. And I could say we're going to talk a lot about vaccine tonight, but we still have to remember that we're still wearing masks, we're still physically distancing, we're still limiting gatherings and washing our hands until we get enough of us vaccinated. Next slide. I'm going to skip over these. I think we know what vaccines are, but I think we have professors who are going to be presenting tonight about the different vaccines. The great news is we have 3 vaccines to talk about tonight. The 2 I know you've heard about, the Moderna and Pfizer, and then the third one is the Janssen or J&J, Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The first 2 are called technology using messenger RNA, and the other is using an adenovirus vector. And again, I believe my other presenters will go into more detail about that. So we can go to the next slide. And we go to the next slide. So again, just to, I want to reinforce this, but again, I know you'll hear about it. These are 3 very highly effective vaccines. They're all a little bit different. The first 2, I think we've all learned, are 2-dose. The Pfizer, you get 3 weeks apart. The Moderna is 4 weeks apart. They vary a little bit. One's for 16 and up, one's for 18. And this last one is unique in that it's 1 dose, only 1 dose, one and done. And it also has much less requirements for storage and diluting. That just makes it so much easier to administer. If the other speakers don't talk about it, we can go back to this. There is some differences in the studies in terms of efficacy, but we have to remember that these studies were carried out at different times in different parts of the country. And I want to emphasize that all 3 of these vaccines are highly effective at preventing death, which I think we all want to prevent that, and being in the hospital, preventing the most serious illnesses related to COVID. We can go to the next slide. I'm going to skip. I want to get to the part where if you already know you want to be, or at the end of this, you'll be convinced that you want to be vaccinated, how to get vaccinated. So we can run through the slides until we get to that. We can keep going. So when can I be vaccinated? So the supply right now continues to be limited. So we're all living through this vaccine priority, and you can see the pyramid. And by now, I think we've all had discussions. Am I 1A, 1B, 1C? When can I get my vaccine? And that's all because of, unfortunately, the limited vaccine. I have to just preface this by saying that we should be really grateful. It is truly amazing that in a year, warp speed, our fantastic scientists have been able to bring 3 authorized vaccines within a year. Truly remarkable. I know that doesn't satisfy everyone who's waiting for their vaccine, but soon all of us will be vaccinated who want to be vaccinated. So I'll talk a little bit about Howard County. Currently, we are vaccinating folks in 1A, which are our healthcare workers, our first responders, and our residents who are residing in nursing homes and assisted living. 1B includes what we call our super seniors who are 75 and up, our educators, and our continuity of government. And we just started, actually, I don't think we even had the clinic. I think Thursday or Friday, we're going to start vaccinating seniors 65 to 74. So that's Howard County Health Department. We'll talk more about that. But the state of Maryland has been vaccinating all persons in 1C for some time. So I understand that there's complexity in sort of understanding where can I get vaccine and who's offering what. We can go to the next slide. So how does local health departments get their vaccine? We get it through the state of Maryland, who gets it through through the CDC. And Maryland has decided to vaccinate through multiple sites. They just don't want people having one place to go. We want people to be able to access vaccine in a variety of sites. So since the beginning, they have allocated vaccine to local health departments like Howard County Health Department, to hospitals like Johns Hopkins and Howard County General and University of Maryland, to pharmacies who have been vaccinating our residents in nursing homes, assisted living, and more recently to our retail pharmacies located CVS, Walgreens, and also in Giant, Safeway, and other supermarkets. Also, they, on a limited basis, have been providing vaccine to large group practices like Chase Brexton, which is our one federally qualified health center, and Kaiser Permanente, which has a location in Columbia. There are additional places around the state that also receive vaccine, like the VA and FEMA and state police for those employees of federal agencies. A person can receive vaccine if they qualify based on the eligibility. So again, in Maryland is vaccinating 1C. So we can go to the next slide. So there is a sign-up process where you could see covidvaxmaryland.gov, where you can register for a number of the mass vaccination sites. There is a site, Six Flags, at the Baltimore Convention Center, M&T Bank Stadium, and soon there will be other mass vac sites coming online. If any of you have heard the governor speak, you know, the hope is to be able to vaccinate 2,000 people a day at these mass vaccination sites. In addition, there are actually 8 retail pharmacies vaccinating folks on a very limited basis. This includes Giant Food in Ellicott City, the Giant Food in Elkridge, and CVS locations as well. All of these locations can be found if you go to the Maryland COVID Vax website. In addition, hospitals across Maryland are also vaccinating individuals who are in their medical system who fit certain criteria. And they are contacting individuals on a case-by-case basis to be able to vaccinate them. So again, if you want to avail yourselves of a variety of different of different opportunities for vaccine, one, you can register on the Maryland Vax site. You can go to the next slide. You can register with Howard County Health Department for our vaccine clinics. We have 2 vaccine clinics, one located at our main office on Stanford Boulevard at Ascend 1, and we're using the HCC gymnasium also. On our website, you will find the pre-registration surveys to complete, and when we receive vaccine and schedule our clinics, we notify folks of the next clinic. You can go to the next slide. In addition, the individual retail pharmacies like Giant, CVS, and Walgreens, you can go to their websites and sign up. And I encourage everyone, it's okay to sign up for all the different places. And when you get contacted, I encourage you to take that first appointment as soon as you can. Don't wait. You can see here, currently at Howard County Health Department, we are vaccinating persons in 1A, healthcare workers, first responders. 1B are super seniors, educators, and continuity of government. And we have just started the 1C group, which is right now only our seniors 65 to 74. And again, you can go to hchealth.org to register, or I should say pre-register for the vaccine and stay up to date on whatever is happening. We can go to the next slide. So just a short reminder what to expect. All appointments across all these different places, meaning the health department, the state, the supermarkets, the retail pharmacies, require appointments. There's no walk-ins. So if you're unable to figure it out, please reach out to us. Please reach out to a friend. Please reach out to your church for help. Hopefully you don't have to wait in line or bad weather. All of us are trying to make it as comfortable as possible for folks. In general, at least our clinics are held in large areas, so we maintain the physical distancing. We try to make it, again, as smooth as possible and as quick as possible. We also, for certain clinics, have accommodations for folks with mobility issues, meaning we'll actually vaccinate folks in cars. We have wheelchairs available and other help that people may need, including technology help, because part of the challenge with registration, at least in my opinion, has been that all of this really requires comfort with technology, or actually the technology, the smartphone or the computer, in order to register. And we can go to the next slide. What happens at any place once you register and you actually get your appointment, I encourage you not to show up early for any appointment. Show up on time. If you have an appointment, it means there's vaccine waiting for you. You don't need to wait for the vaccine. Some clinics will generally ask you for your ID just to identify who you are. They may also ask you for documentation verifying the eligibility for the certain clinic. It may be as easy as, if you're in the super senior 75 and up, your driver's license or other ID will show what your date of birth is. If you have signed up for a private school clinic, it will ask you for verification that you actually work for a private or independent school or daycare or whatever that is. Once you go into the site, or it could be a drive-through site, and remember, I also said that we vaccinate people in their cars. One of the great vaccinators will verify certain information, ask you certain questions. You'll receive your vaccine lickety-split, but then you will be asked to wait 15 or 30 minutes, depending on if you have any history of allergies. And then once that's done, you're on your way until you have to come back for your second dose, unless you're some of the lucky new folks who will getting the single dose Janssen vaccine. You can go to the next slide. I talked about this, you may have to wait, and then hopefully we see you back for a second appointment. Just a reminder, if you are getting the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine, it's really, really important that you come back for that second dose to make sure you're fully vaccinated. Next slide. So what can you do? Stay tuned, stay abreast of all the information. There's new information coming out all the time. If you haven't yet pre-registered for any of the clinics anywhere, please do. If you need help or assistance navigating any part of the system, please reach out to your trusted champion, friend, advisor, church, or health department. We're here to help you. And next slide. And I'll end here. So what happens after you get your vaccine? Well, most times for these 2 vaccines that we have now, you really have to wait 2 weeks to be considered fully immune. But even then, we're still wearing our masks. We're still physically distancing. We're still washing our hands and limiting our interactions with others. And I think we'll need to do that till a sufficient proportion of our population has been tested. Or has been vaccinated, I should say. Spring is coming, warmer weather is coming, which is better for us, not so good for the COVID virus. So hang in there, please be patient. Vaccine is coming, all of us will get vaccinated, and soon, not soon enough, but soon we will return to normalcy. So thank you, and I'll be around to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rossman. That was wonderful. I was very excited about the 18%. I didn't realize we were up even that high. So that is great. So at this time, we want to invite Dr. Nia Leek to present to us the science behind vaccines and how they work and how specifically COVID-19 vaccine is working for us. Dr. Leek?
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. And I am definitely happy to share some of the science behind the COVID vaccine. I'm an OBGYN with Howard County General. And so, but I'm a mother as well. I live in a home with my parents and we've got dogs and everyone's very active. And so again, it's a matter of us trying to figure out how to be safe. And so as I look at 3 generations within one household, it was important for me to understand as well, what is the science behind the COVID vaccine? Next slide. So, the coronavirus really came to the forefront initially abroad in November, December of 2019. But yet, as of January 2020, the National Institute of Health, our leading research organization that's based right here in Maryland, the scientists already began looking to try to understand what is the coronavirus and how can we fight it. And again, this is the team of leading scientists who have worked on and studied and researched many other vaccines. So this was not necessarily new to them, although it was a new pathogen. So the first thing they did was to discover or try to figure out what is the genetic material of the coronavirus and what information do they need to get from this virus in order to find out the components to fight it. And as early as late January 2020, they had already discovered what we call the spike protein. Next. So this is an enlarged picture I'm sure many of you have seen of the actual coronavirus particle. And you see these little red kind of spikes coming off of it. These are the spikes that actually attach to the mucosa, the skin of the mouth, of the nose, of the eyes. And that makes it so easy for the coronavirus to get into our human system. So what they did is said, let me look at this spike protein, which doesn't carry any of the material that makes this an infectious process, but we can use this information to find out how we can fight the actual virus itself. So they isolated this information within the coronavirus particle that makes this spike protein. So in other words, I say they figured out what the recipe was for this spike protein, just a very, very small part of the coronavirus particle. And again, it does not cause any symptoms or infection. Next slide. So then they took this recipe, which we call messenger RNA. The messenger RNA is the recipe solely for making this spike protein. It does not necessarily need any nucleus from the cells or any other special materials. It itself is just the recipe for the spike protein. Next slide. So what they did is said, okay, now we have this information for the spike protein, which is a very small part of the coronavirus particle. How do we get it into the human system without causing any problems and stimulating the body to want to fight against the actual coronavirus? And again, if it's the spike protein is very similar to the actual full coronavirus, it can protect us. So what they did is they took that isolated, extracted messenger RNA, that recipe, and they wrapped it up in different fats and sugars and proteins, very similar to what is in our diet. So many people worry about what's in the vaccine. Is there different components and ingredients and preservatives? It really is just basic sugars and proteins that our body is already familiar with. And then that way it will more easily be accepted by our body and by the cells. And we will have less of any type of reaction to receiving the vaccine because it's using all of the very similar foods and substances that we normally take in. Next slide, please. So now that they figured out a way to coat this recipe for the spike protein, we're ready to administer the vaccine. So how does that work? The vaccine is composed in a liquid that we inject into the skin, into the arm, and it finds its way to human cells. Now, the question that many people have is, does it get into the DNA? Will it change my DNA? I'm an OBGYN, so our big question is, can it get to babies? Can it get in through breast milk and start to alter DNA? No, it cannot, because this recipe, this information, just sits into a particle within the cell called the ribosome. I think of the ribosome really as a photocopier. It's a very small structure in the cell that does not go into the DNA, and it simply reads the recipe and makes lots of photocopies. And so in this picture, we can see that the messenger RNA from the vaccine enters these little structures called ribosomes, which are like copying machines, only to make this spike protein. And again, the spike protein doesn't cause any of the symptoms or problems of the coronavirus. It's just a little, what I call like a little mimic of the actual virus so the body can start to respond. Never entering the cell nucleus, never affecting the human DNA. Next slide. So once these ribosomes start producing these spike proteins, they start to surface just on the top of the cells and in the bloodstream. And the way the body works is if it recognizes something foreign that's not supposed to be there, you start to develop an immune response or an antibody response. So just like the flu vaccine, you get that with the whole purpose of developing an immune response so you can fight off any new strains of the flu when the season comes. And this is the same way our body works with the coronavirus. We start to produce these little Y-shaped particles called antibodies that go to protect our body from this spike protein. And what it does is it gets our body ready for if we are exposed to someone with the coronavirus. Our body says, we've seen that before. We saw that spike protein before. We know we don't like it. Now we can fight it. And our body will produce an antibody or immune response. Next slide. So when we get the vaccine, we do have an immune response. And when our body gets prepared and starts fighting off foreign particles or viruses or bacteria, we can sometimes get side effects from that. And that is why we can get side effects from the coronavirus vaccine. Common side effects can be fatigue, extreme tiredness. You can have pain or swelling at the injection site, just like any vaccine or injection. You can get fevers or chills, as well as a headache. And there are some reports of nausea and vomiting and some stomach upset. Again, these side effects are caused by the body's response while it's creating these antibodies. If you are to get side effects, it usually occurs within 6 to 12 hours, and it can last for a couple days. So we do say to persons who may be working or things like that, of course, you want to make the very first appointment you can possibly to get the vaccine, but just be aware that you may need to rest a day or two after the administration of the vaccine due to the side effects. Now, one of the things that we know has been reported, although it's still rare, is an allergic reaction. So you may have heard in the media of patients developing what's called anaphylaxis, a severe allergic reaction from the coronavirus. So we do recommend that anyone who has a history of severe allergies or anaphylaxis to talk to your physician before getting the vaccine. And then that way together, you and your doctor can make a decision as to how to approach the coronavirus vaccine. Go ahead, next slide, please. Now, there is a new third vaccine that just came out on the market that I'm sure everyone's heard about last week, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The mRNA vaccines refer to the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, like Dr. Rossman talked about, but there is a new third vaccine that just came out last week. And the way this vaccine was created is the way that many of other vaccines that we have already received were created. What is the technology includes using just a small piece of that genetic material that is found in the coronavirus. And we take a little bit of it and put it in a virus that our body's already known for. So adenovirus, it probably sounds scary. They're giving me another virus. But the adenovirus is the responsible virus that causes essentially the common cold. So most of us have already been exposed to a cold before. And therefore, the adenovirus is a very weak virus that causes very, very low response. And the way that they use the adenovirus in making this vaccine, it essentially has no response in the human body. It just becomes a vehicle, a vector for this little bit of this coronavirus information. It's then administered again to us through the vaccine. Our bodies recognize it and incorporate it on top of the cells, our normal cells. And as it sits there, our own body starts to recognize there's a foreign body. What's going on? Let me start creating an immune response. Let me start creating an antibody response. And then our body once again starts to produce these Y-shaped antibodies that develop an immune response to protect us for when we are exposed to the actual coronavirus. Next slide. So I know that a lot, has been discussed about how quickly these two mRNA, the messenger RNA vaccines, have been approved. But the technology in and of itself is not new to the medical community. It has been researched and studied associated with the influenza virus, the Zika virus, as well as rabies. And so while it actually has not come to the market or been approved by FDA, using messenger RNA as a vaccine vehicle is not a brand new technology. Messenger RNA has also been looked at as a vehicle, even in cancer trials. So that is why the National Institute of Health, NIH, was able to kind of figure out how to isolate the spike protein as well as the messenger RNA very quickly. So very quickly, how clinical trials are done. Again, they work in the lab. They're looking at these different technologies, applying it to new viruses, applying it into different species to find out whether or not it's safe to give to humans. As early as March of 2020, the National Institute of Health had already initiated phase 1 of the clinical trials. As of March of 2020, they had already started giving this messenger RNA technology to other beings to try and see how they would react to it. And they responded wonderfully. It was safe. So we were able over the course of the year to see more and more people to try these two messenger RNA vaccines such that it came to the FDA for review. And it was approved in December. And since then, we're still following to make sure that everyone's tolerating the vaccine well. And at this point in time, we're vaccinating greater than 1 million participants or persons every day. And the vaccine has still been proven to be safe. Next slide. Next slide, please. So the next
Looks like
slide.
I only see 10 slides in there.
Oh, okay, that's okay. So the next thing really just to talk about that Dr. Rassman already talked about is that the timing of the vaccines. Again, with the Pfizer, it's a 21-day between the first dose and the second dose. And for the Moderna, it's 28 days between the first dose and the second dose. And with Johnson & Johnson, we're grateful it's a one-time dose because we can reach many more people much more efficiently, and hopefully, the news and the reports that it should be widely available by beginning of summer will be true. So thank you. Hopefully I explained it well, the science of vaccines, specifically the messenger RNA vaccines, as well as the vector-mediated vaccine of Johnson & Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Leek. That was exactly what we needed to hear. That explains so many things to me. I appreciate it. So as we transition, right before we transition, just want to remind you that there's a quick 3-question questionnaire in the chat or in the comment sections, as well as a link to a resource page if you are looking for more written resources. At this time, we invite Dr. Reese and Dr. Chen to talk with us about the myths that are coming around this COVID-19 vaccine. So Dr. Reese and Dr. Chen, the time is yours.
I'm going to have Dr. Chen go first.
Okay. Well, I was intending to do a slideshow to show some slides, but I think a lot of the content has already been presented this evening. So what I'll do is I'll try to go through them quickly. And then Dean Reese and I have actually prepared a set of questions and answers that we would like to go through as well this evening. So I think what's been stated already by Drs. Leek and Rossman are the incredible technologies that have been taken advantage of to develop these vaccines. This slide is just showing you not just the US vaccines, but also the global vaccines that have also been developed as well to try to defeat this pandemic. Because again, we're not just an isolated community, we're a global community. And even if we defeat the pandemic here in the US, we are always going to be susceptible to reintroduction from outside of the US because of the travel and other means. And again, I'm a global health person, so I'm actually very interested in trying to protect communities that live in low and middle income countries. So again, for having a number of these vaccines available for the global population is very helpful. What you're also seeing here are some of the different technologies that are being used to develop these vaccines. So we already know about mRNA and a viral vectored vaccine, which are the ones that are successfully being used now and being launched here in the US. There are nanoparticle-based vaccines. That's the Novavax vaccine, which you may be hearing about in the next few weeks and months. And then there are a number of cell culture-based, what we call adjuvanted vaccines. And adjuvants are basically additional ingredients that you can add to a vaccine to give it extra power to be able to protect. So the reason why the shingles vaccine is so successful is because it has a very powerful adjuvant. There are other adjuvanted vaccines such as the human papillomavirus vaccine, and there's a flu vaccine that's available. So anyways, this is just to give you a wide overview of the many different types of vaccines. Now, what you're seeing here are numbers of different efficacies that have been reported. Only the ones here that you're seeing here are the ones in the US that have been reported in peer-reviewed literature. That's what I really like to see. Now, if we go to talking about vaccine efficacy, which is a lot of the discussion these days, people throw around these numbers, 95% efficacy for the mRNA-based vaccine. And then people say, well, this J&J vaccine has 66% efficacy, so doesn't that make one better than the other? My answer is no. These vaccines are all incredibly valuable. And the important part to remember is that when we talk about efficacy, that those numbers that are slung around are really talking about protecting against moderate levels of illness, which might be just a fever, cough, and sore throat. Now, what's really important for the medical system is hospitalization, ICU stay, and death. And so those are other measures of the value of vaccines. So you want to know if those vaccines protect against severe disease, against, again, hospitalization or death. And sometimes you can even measure whether or not it has the effect of preventing asymptomatic infection. So most of the studies that were performed did not look at these other features very well, but they did look at that primary efficacy, that moderate illness. And that's what these curves are showing you. So again, these are the people who are vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine, and these are the persons who were unvaccinated in that particular study. And you can see the separation of these curves really showing you visually how effective these vaccines are. This is the Moderna vaccine versus placebos. And here's the J&J vaccine versus placebos. Again, in all of these instances, you can see how there's a tremendous value to these vaccines by being vaccinated. And what we do know is that in all of these studies, all three of these, among the vaccinees, none of them were hospitalized or died. So that's the importance of the vaccines. And I think that when we talk about efficacy, we sometimes lose the real perspective of the value of these vaccines. Now, when we talk about implementation, because I sit on the CDC's ACIP committee, the past couple of days, we were talking about, the J&J vaccine, but also been talking about how to implement these vaccines effectively. And we need to remember that right now we're at a stage where we have limited doses of the vaccine and we're trying to highly target priority populations. And of course, Dr. Rossman already reviewed kind of our prioritization scheme here in the state of Maryland. But eventually we're going to be, and hopefully this will be in the next few weeks and months, entering into a stage where we have plenty of vaccine available. And this is where we will continue to surge in our capacity and try to use more innovative and broad-based approaches to be able to deliver these vaccines, which will be the local pharmacy, at mass vaccination clinics. Perhaps we'll have home health aides that will be able to deliver the vaccines to people who, again, are not able to get transportation or are otherwise bedbound, or others that are parts of our very important population. We need to continue to make these vaccines accessible. One of the great travesties of this pandemic is that it's brought about the health inequities that have been apparent in our population for generations, but now is making it so evident right now because of the burden of disease in certain parts of our communities. And so making sure that we can have these vaccines accessible to these populations, whether it's because of limitations in technology, whether it's limitations in their transportation, whether it's communication because of language barriers, whether it's many of these other things, we need to break down those barriers and make these vaccines accessible. Variant viruses we're hearing about in the lay press right now, and we're talking about the UK, the Brazil, the South African variant. Why are they important? All of these genetic mutations are the variants, and they can either have three effects. They can either have no change to the virus, they can actually decrease the virus's biology and fitness, and those die out, and we don't care about that. And in fact, these two instances we don't really care about. It's that third instance where we might have increased fitness of the virus. And that increased fitness means that that virus may be able to get better transmission, and that's what we're seeing with these three variants that we talk about in the press very frequently. We may have increased severity of illness when you get infected. We're seeing a little bit of that, not a lot yet. And then there eventually, if there are more of those mutations, the ability for these viruses to evade our testing, our therapeutics, and our vaccines. What I want you to think about is this as a visualization. So that spike protein is like the face of the virus. And the more mutations that you have on that spike protein, it's like putting on a disguise. And there are these three mutations that are on the Brazilian and the South African, and those are the ones that are the most widely variant, the most unlike the original virus. Well, again, you think of those as disguises on the face of the virus, and you can see how, again, it's going to be more and more difficult as you make a more complex disguise to be able to recognize that virus. And that's what that vaccine is trying to fight against, and our therapeutics or our testing is to try to recognize these viruses to be able to eradicate them quickly. So I'm going to stop there and stop my slides.
So Dr. Chen, we're going to into a little conversation between us now. And clearly what we want to do, hopefully, is to address some of the frequently asked questions that many individuals may have. Some questions may be myths, some may be misunderstandings, some may be just misinformation or lack of information. So hopefully we'll get a chance to clarify a number of these. We also want to talk a little bit about the pros and the cons of vaccinations that sometimes get raised in our community. So let me start with our first question. Now, as was said earlier by Dr. Rossman and Dr. Leek, for example, that these, particularly the Moderna and the Pfizer, were really produced rather rapidly. They all were, but in particular, the mRNA vaccines were produced rather rapidly. In the past, vaccine would take years to be produced, but these are rapidly produced. But at the same time, the government says they're safe and effective despite their speed. Now, as was mentioned by Dr. Leek, the first two, Moderna and Pfizer, do not have viral particles. They're really just the genetic code that really is used to generate the protein, the spike protein, from which our bodies develop a response to. Now, the question is, how do we know that the genetic code that that we've used to create the vaccine do not in some way alter or affect our own genes? How do we know that? How would you convince a listening audience who is suspicious that that is not the case? How do you do that?
I don't know if I have the power to convince people, but what I'll do is I'll try to convince to talk about what our science says and what what I know about and the confidence of these vaccines. So, mRNAs in general, they don't integrate and change genes. They don't go into the cell's nucleus. They break down very rapidly. And we know that the biology of these vaccines and mRNAs in general last very fleetingly, but they last long enough for them to be able to express the protein that they encode. And that's all they do, is that their lives are basically to encode those proteins, make them very quickly, and then they disappear. So there's really not that ability for it to change our genes or to be passed on to, say, a breastfeeding mother to the child, or a pregnant woman to the fetus. It's the same way with the Janssen vaccine. In fact, it's a viral encoded protein, the spike protein, but it's an inactivated virus. And so that infection, it's not an infection. You're basically being injected with a virus-made vaccine, but it's not a live vaccine at all. In fact, all three of these vaccines are inactivated vaccines, non-living vaccines.
So that's a very nice segue to my next question. My next question has to do with safety. Some have said, the speed by which these vaccines are produced has just been unprecedented. And it defies reason to think that they could be safe. Maybe there's something that was maybe overlooked or rushed. Again, how and why should I trust the safety given the speed? And I think you alluded to it in your answer, but why don't you emphasize that one more time, please?
Well, I can also address this in a slightly different way. So, we were able to make these vaccines fast because of multiple different reasons. One of them is that the government and scientists have been investing in these technologies to be able to make vaccines quickly for many years. In fact, Dean Reese, that we were engaged with the Ebola response in West Africa in 2014. This was using viral vectored vaccines. We were also involved almost 20 years ago with the Gates Foundation to make a DNA-based vaccine for measles. So we've been engaged in making these types of vaccines, innovative vaccines, for many years. So that's one thing. So as soon as you're able to sequence the virus, this COVID virus, then you're able to start making a vaccine, and you get a head start. So you get a head start, and that's how you can make it faster. The second thing is that the federal government invested billions of dollars into the process of making these vaccines. Now, normally vaccines take, a timeline of 10, maybe 20 years. Why is that? Well, largely because you have to make a business argument to continue to develop the vaccine. But once the federal government injected the billions of dollars, there was no economic argument, there was no decision-making process to be able to go from one stage to the next. We were able to move quickly from those stages based on the scientific evidence, not having to build a business case for the vaccine being developed. So that's another reason why we were able to make them so quickly. And then the third thing is that the FDA came out very early on in June to publish the guidelines for what would be a successful vaccine. And those are very objective measures where they basically said, this is the safety information you need to provide. This is the efficacy information you need to provide. And that was very clearly, those guideposts were published very early on so that all of industry that are making COVID vaccines knew exactly where they needed to go. So there was not a lot of decision making in the process in terms of how to develop and this and that, which could take many years for that decision process. A lot of that was taken away so that we could effectively go from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 very quickly. So that's how I say that, again, and we did not skip over any of the safety features in the evaluation as we went from phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So those phase studies were still performed the way that you normally would for any licensed vaccine or drug.
So Dr. Chen, what you've just described very, very eloquently is the fact that the latter part of this vaccine development was rapid, but the earlier part, which is the creation of the technology, took years to develop. But the technology was awaiting a disease for it to be applied, for the vaccine to be applied. So indeed, yes, it did take a short time, but just in the latter part, the former part really was the creation of this mRNA technology, which in fact was not that short. So here's one more question for you. There's some who have commented that these vaccines are made from tissues from aborted fetuses. Is there, how do you respond to that? And should that be of concern to someone? And if so, why not? If not, why not?
Yeah, and that's a common myth that I think is spread out there. For the mRNA-based vaccines, there's no cells that are used in making those vaccines. So that's out of the equation. Now, for the viral vectored vaccines, they do need to be made in a cell culture. That's how you make large amounts of the vaccine. And it was based on the early development of some of the vaccines were based on cells that were created very long ago in the 60s from an aborted fetus. So that is a point of contention, and that is a real point, again, in the religious community where, again, you have, this, you do not want to be using or promoting abortion at all. Now, the Southern Baptist Convention and also the Roman Catholic Church have actually ruled on this multiple times, reviewed this in an ethical process and evaluated all of the information. And they have actually cited that these vaccines are so incredibly valuable for public health. That was an infraction that was performed once in the 60s. And we need to understand that this is a wrong that was done, but we're going to move past it because of the public health urgency of these, and that there are right now no cell culture, cell lines that are alternatives. But of course, the ethicists in our religious communities are urging for us scientists to be able to create alternative cell lines that are completely, without question, related to any abortion or any aborted fetuses. So again, what I want to say is the bottom line is that our vaccines right now are not being made by any aborted fetus cells. But the early creation of some of these vaccines was based on these cell lines that were created, again, originating way back.
So we have to distinguish between the vaccines, mRNA vaccines at the present time versus what has been done in the past. And it's an important point of distinction, and a point that is raised sometimes, but is conflated with all vaccines, when in fact that is not the case. So we want to put that to rest. So here's one more question sometimes is raised, and that is, some have the belief that taking the vaccine itself may cause COVID infection. Now, is there a truth to that? And if so, explain where this came from or may have come from.
Right. And I think that people may confuse some of the reactions that a person may get after any vaccination with getting an infection. So I commonly have that comment to me even during flu vaccination campaigns. And so, yes, an injection may have a sore arm and maybe some feverishness and achiness that's associated with it, but that's not the infection. And in the case of these COVID vaccines, we know that the mRNA-based vaccines actually have a little bit more what we call reactogenicity. So a lot more profound headache, body aches, feverishness can be experienced, especially by younger people, and especially after the second dose rather than after the first dose. But by no means does this mean that you're being injected with the virus itself, the live virus COVID, and you're not being infected and you're not experiencing COVID infection.
So on that same note, we're going to take it one step further, and there's look at some other side effects. For example, some have said, well, these side effects may be dangerous, or they've heard in the press or from friends that some of their friends have died. Are these side effects real? Is this a myth, or is it in fact reality?
Well, I think that, and I've been contacted by email by many people in the general population with these types of questions. And what happens is that there will be an article in the press where someone dies shortly after vaccination, or even after 2 doses of the mRNA-based vaccine, that they will die. Now, what they fail to mention is that they died of a natural cause. So oftentimes it's a heart attack or some other thing, and that it's in a person who, again, had perhaps a past history of heart attack and hypertension and diabetes. So again, there will be some adverse effects that, just due to the coincidence of timing after vaccination, will be picked up. And that is oftentimes then picked up in the press, and the vaccine is implicated. But if you look at what we call the background rate of the rate of these types of things that happen in the normal population anyways, how often heart attacks and strokes happen in our population, whether or not you're deploying a vaccine, you'll see it at a certain rate and you'll pick it up. So now that we're giving millions of doses of vaccines, of course, we'll start seeing these types of natural events that occur. And just because of the sheer timing of us deploying these vaccines, that people will think, they just got their vaccine a few hours ago and they died of a heart attack. And so they will somehow implicate the vaccine. So I think that that's what's happening oftentimes, and that's what gets inflated in the popular press.
And these are very important. These are not unusual occurrences for there to be true, and unrelated, or sometimes referred as epiphenomena. Two things that are occurring that may not be causal, but just happen to be associated with each other based on timing. But it really
absolutely correct.
Easily conflated. Now, Dr. Neal mentioned that she's an obstetrician gynecologist, and so am I, maternal medicine. And so we're interested in the health of the mother and the fetus. So here's an example of someone, a woman in the reproductive age group is planning to have a child soon or sometime in the future. And there is a discussion in her neighborhood that maybe she shouldn't take the vaccine because she's thinking about becoming pregnant one of these days. Is that wise to hold off in getting vaccination because of your plans for becoming pregnant? And then how about if she is in fact pregnant? Those are two separate questions.
Yeah, and I think that this brings about questions about fertility. Do these vaccines have an effect on fertility? And that has been a myth that's been promoted in many different circles. In fact, in Pakistan, when we were trying to find bin Laden, I think that was one of those myths that unfortunately occurred afterwards, and that has affected our polio vaccination program there, which is this myth of vaccines causing infertility, whether for nefarious reasons or inadvertently. Again, that is a myth that is completely untrue. As we said, these vaccines, the mRNA-based vaccines and the viral vectored vaccine, do not integrate or alter the DNA in any way. So they will not affect fertility, and they will not affect the fetus for a pregnant woman.
Very, very important to clarify that. My last question to you is really another commentary that you hear sometimes. And you'll hear it's been floated around in the public press, the lay press, I should say, and that is these vaccines, some of these vaccines, or maybe most of these vaccines, are laced with computer chips that could potentially control your mind. And so the manufacturers or the medical profession use this method or avenue to really have some direct effect on you. Now, how do you respond to that? How should we respond to that in the medical profession as we provide counsel to our patients?
Yeah, well, I guess I shouldn't have laughed or chuckled, because I think it's a serious question for some people. But I think that this notion that that we could microchip vaccines or somehow use some sort of advanced technology to try to control and label our population is, I think, a technology that we don't have right now. If you've ever microchipped your pet, I think the smallest microchip that you can get, which is actually impressively small, but it's about the size of a rice grain. But a rice grain is far larger than the needle bore of any needle that I know of that you would want to get vaccinated with. Now we have very large needles, but that's not what you'd use to deliver vaccines. We don't have, there is no technology, I think, to be able to do that. I think that it's a fun kind of if you watch the X-Files or some of these other shows, it's an interesting and fun notion, but I don't think that there is that technology out there, nor is there even really that eagerness at the federal level to be able to track humans to that level. I think maybe people think that we do that, we meaning the government or others, but I don't think that that is a movement that is out there.
So, Dr. Chen, these are all my questions. It's quite likely that during the question and answer period we may have additional questions, but hopefully we get a chance to provide some information, clarify any misinformation that may be there. So, thank you all for inviting us and for listening to us.
Thank you, Dr. Reese and Dr. Chen. That was wonderful information. I really liked how you handled it and went back and forth with your knowledge, because between the two of you, you bring so much to the table. At this time, we wanted to open up an opportunity for Pastor Gary Wimbish, and to allow him to speak with us about the decision-making process, because we know a number of people are still out there trying to decide, do I take it, do I not? And we know that it is difficult and an individual decision. And so we want Pastor Gary Wimbish to address that. But before he does that, before he begins, we would like to show you a couple of testimonies from some healthcare workers that are right here in Maryland, working with the situation. And so at this time, let's hear our testimonies. And then after that, Pastor Gary, you are on.
Hi, my name is Rhonda Jones. I live in the Randallstown area. I work as a nursing assistant and a medicine aide, so I am in the front line. I contracted the COVID-19 vaccine at my place of employment. At first, I was skeptical about taking a vaccine because it's new and they came up with it very quickly. But I prayed about it, I consulted about it, and I went ahead and took the vaccine because people on chemo have a lower percentage rate of survival rate than a 90% effectiveness of the COVID vaccine. So I just thank God for allow me to see another year and to be able to share this with you. So if you were to compare a cancer patient on chemo, then the 90% effectiveness of the COVID vaccine, the the vaccine is a more higher rate than the people on chemo, most people on chemotherapy. So when I received the first shot, my arm, I had soreness in my arm. It did hurt for about a week, but after that, it went away. I had no other symptoms. And then I had the second shot and had no symptoms at all. So, yes, I had COVID-19. I contracted from my place of employment. My symptoms was low at first, and then it led to COVID pneumonia, where I did go to the hospital, and they gave me a IV drip and antibiotics to go home with. I'm thankful I didn't have to stay in the hospital, and I thank God for healing my body. I used to vape, and I was vaping at the time, and my chest started hurting, and I went to the emergency room. but I thought I was having a heart attack. And they gave me an IV drip. When I came home, I instantly just threw the vape in the dumpster, not even in the trash. I took it to the dumpster. And I haven't vaped ever since then.
Hi, my name is Maxine. I work as a nurse practitioner at a hospital. Um, so COVID-19 started almost a year ago. When it first started, we didn't really think much about it, but as the days went by, COVID-19 started getting worse. More people started dying. The number of cases in the country started rising, and it started creating some kind of fear in the hearts of people around us. I've been a nurse for many years, so it was not something that frightened me overtly, but as time went by, we were all starting to get a little concerned. Um, Life changed, schools closed, going to shopping became a completely different experience, and taking care of patients also changed. Everything changed, and we were so tired of being isolated, could not go to church, could not go and visit family members. So this impact was great, but there have been very positive things about it too. Anyway, as time passed by, we were very excited as a vaccine became a reality. We were, however, a little bit worried and scared too. So once the vaccine was here, there was a lot of talk about different politics influencing the vaccine. The studies were not complete. This was done really fast, the studies, so we were also questioning how safe it would be. The decision was not an easy one. Um, Initially, I did not want to take the vaccine. A lot of my friends were sending me videos and messages about how dangerous this vaccine could be. But finally, the day came when the vaccine was available and the hospital wanted us to give them a decision. None of us were forced. We were given enough time to think about it. I started looking through all the available literatures, and I've discovered that the studies involved 2,000 people, at least for the vaccine we were getting, and nobody died from those vaccines. Some of these other messages that I got from family members and friends were a little scary. Some of them did not make full sense. And so finally, just like every other decision, I took this to God in prayer. I asked God to give me the wisdom to make the right decision. And as I was thinking about it, it reminded me of all the other decisions I've had people take in their lifetime when they came to me for help as a healthcare provider. I remembered how we put all the benefits and the risk on the table and then made our decision together. So I applied that same experience to myself. I put all my facts on one side, I put all my fears on the other side, and I took it to God, and then finally there was some amount of peace that God gave me. I decided to take the vaccine knowing there were risks, knowing that there could be dangerous problems that would come out of this. Ultimately, all these risks did not look as bad as COVID-19 at its worst, because at the hospital I work, there were COVID-19 patients, and even though I didn't directly take care of them, I heard about how each one progressed in their illness towards death. So all these side effects did not look as bad as death. And therefore I took the vaccine, and the vaccines were given in 2 doses. The first dose at the point of your comfort and decision, and then the second dose was 3 weeks after that. We watched all our colleagues take the vaccines at different times. We did it purposely so that all of us would not get sick at the same time. So after watching the first trailblazers who went and took the vaccine, we watched them and made fun of them and saw that all of them were fine. So when I took my vaccine, I did not expect a lot of side effects. Unlike my colleagues, my first dose gave me the worst side effects. I had pain, I had low-grade fever, and I thought I was going to be really sick the day I got the vaccine. The next day morning, when I woke up, I had no more pain except for local injection site pain, and I was able to go back to work. Again, on the third week, when I had to take the second dose of the vaccine, I forgot to take my medicine with me, my Tylenol with me. Anyway, I just said a prayer, went over there, took the vaccine, came back home, and I did not have many side effects. The only side effect I experienced was local pain and just some vague nausea that went away. Now, some of my colleagues had other side effects. Some of them had fever, some of them had to call off for 1 or 2 days, but all of us are back to normal. It's been 2 months since we got all our vaccines. Nobody had any severe side effects. My only word for you would be that when you make your decision to take the vaccine, do your own research, go to the facts, look at what the scientists are saying, look at what the people around you who have already taken vaccine are experiencing, and also look at the disease itself. And then you can make your own risk-benefit decision by placing all these facts in front of you and then placing yourself in front of God. God is so good, and I believe that God gave the wisdom to certain people to help all of us, and it looks like it wouldn't be a bad decision to take the vaccine. I'm doing well today, so I can only tell you what happened to me. The decision for the vaccine would be yours.
At this time, we invite Pastor Gary to speak with us.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank Ms. Jones and Ms. Charles for sharing their story with us this evening. It really brings out the full symmetry and the harmony between the science as well as spirituality. Without a doubt, we have been inundated with a vast amount of information, critical information. And now the challenge and the task before each of us is how do we process all of this data into a reasonable decision-making matrix, which will help guide our decisions that have dramatic influences upon us and others. I think the landscape for this decision-making process is analogous to the familiar parable that Jesus spoke to the young lawyer who asked him, what must he do to inherit eternal life? And of course, from that emanated the parable of the Good Samaritan. And one of the provocative questions that emanated from that exchange was, who is my neighbor? I would present to you, I would posit to you this evening that our decision is centered around and is a response to who is my neighbor. I would suggest that there are three categories: the personal, the social, and the civic. Who is my neighbor as it relates to the responsibilities that I have to myself, to my family members, to the circle of influence, whether it's my church, the synagogue or mosque, or possibly your local Starbucks, your coffee house, especially when we return to normal, to normalcy. But if we are making a decision in terms of whether or not to take the vaccine or not, how will this impact people that I love, individuals that I am concerned about? How will this affect them? Will this add to their well-being, or will it detract from that? These are critical decisions that we must make. And as we have seen this evening, there is this harmony between science as well as with spirituality for people of faith. And so my hope and desire and prayer that as we are making the decision, it is not merely a political decision, but truly something that we are taking into consideration of that will impact us individually, but also will impact our family members, especially if we have loved ones who have comorbidities, who are in categories that are suspect or extremely vulnerable, individuals on our jobs, our children. So these are some of the things, some of the factors that we will need to take into consideration as we are reviewing the information, as we're looking at the data, as we're looking at the social responsibilities, as we're looking at our civic responsibility, as well as the larger community. And it is going to be my prayer that we will all take all of this information, all of the data, and then also presenting ourselves to the Lord, asking Him for guidance and for direction as we seek to make a decision that is going to be in our best interest, the best interest of our families, the best interest of our community.
Thank you, Pastor Gary. We appreciate that. All right, so we're running a little over, but we would really like to get in a few of the questions that have not been answered. Many of the questions have been answered by our doctors tonight, but we would like to ask a quick question from each one of our panelists. So Dr. Chen, we're going to start with you. How long does the immunity from the vaccine last in comparison to the immunity acquired after an infection, and which type of immunity is more robust? Is there a difference?
It looks like that these vaccines actually have superior immunity. That's the limited data that we have so far. We know that when you get natural infection, that immunity may decline rather rapidly. In fact, we see it sometimes disappearing by 3 months. But we do see that these vaccines are at least having enduring protection that lasts at least 6 months. Ask me in another 6 months and I'll hopefully be able to provide whether or not it lasts for a year. And hopefully ask me in about 1.5 years and I'll be able to provide you with data to suggest whether it lasts for 2 years. So those studies that were performed, we actually are obligated to follow them for a full 2 years. So we'll have that information, but I don't have a crystal ball that'll help me to know what the data will show ahead of time. But it does look like that these vaccines are highly valuable because of the type of protection that is being given.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. So we have a number of questions coming in regarding the potential for cancer. So Dr. Leek, the one question we would like to emphasize here is regarding the long-term side effects. Can the vaccine cause cancer of any kind later down the line?
Great question. That's often a concern that we have. But again, going back to the ingredients, and I know that there even have been a couple of questions about the ingredients. Essentially, again, that messenger RNA is just a recipe. It does not get involved in the actual genes of the human body. And wonderful work has been done in cancer research to let us know that the majority of cancers stem from some alteration in genes. And that is why these vaccines are safe, because they do not interfere with the human genome, altering any of the products that contribute to the gene, and that even the ingredients that are being used, basic salt and potassium and chloride, using basic sugars like sucrose, again, using fatty lipids, very simple, similar to cholesterol, our natural cholesterol, do not actually integrate with any of the genome or the processes of our DNA that can contribute to cancer. Again, we've known about this particular vaccine for a year, so we don't have long-term data, but just basic science will let us know that the risk of cancer is almost impossible.
Thank you. Dr. Rossman, how long after taking the vaccine should a person stop wearing the mask and stop physical distancing? I know you spoke on it, but I think we need it emphasized one more time.
Great question. So for the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, it is estimated that after your second dose, it takes at least 2 weeks to build what we call full immunity. So until you reach 2 weeks after the second dose of your vaccine of the Moderna and the Pfizer, you should assume that you're vaccine naive. For the new Janssen or Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the studies have waited until 28 days post that first dose until you're considered fully immune. Once you reach those periods of time, you're as protected as we think you can be. And again, as Dr. Chen has pointed out, studies will tell us in 3 months, in 6 months, in a year, really how effective these vaccines are. But what I'm going to say now is hard to hear. I've just said after 2 weeks or after 28 days, you're fully protected. But what we don't know from these studies is how well these vaccines prevent persons who are vaccinated from transmitting it to others. We suspect that they're very good at that, but we don't know because they really weren't studied. So until everyone is vaccinated, we're going to need to be wearing our masks, physically distancing, not gathering and hugging the way we like, and washing our hands. I'm hopeful that everyone will be able to get vaccinated who wants to be vaccinated within the next 3 and certainly 6 months. And I'm hopeful for next holiday season, we'll be hugging, we'll be getting together, all the things that we so greatly miss. And I just say, please be patient. Please continue doing the things that we've been doing. I know it's hard, but together we'll get through this, and these vaccines are lifesavers.
Thank you. All right, and Dr. Reese, the question is this really a vaccine or a treatment therapy? Since vaccines usually protect against specific diseases, but these vaccines are said to lessen severity of disease, but are not actual protection. What is your understanding, Dr. Reese?
These are vaccines because they do, in many respects, work in a preventive way. And as I think Dr. Chen and others have said, they work to prevent severity of disease, whether it be complications requiring hospitalization, ICU care, or even deaths. They may not prevent the actual prodromal stage, what we call symptomatic infections, such as the running nose or maybe the throat ache. It may not prevent that. But even with the flu vaccines that we take on an annual basis, they also may sometimes not prevent us from getting those mild symptoms. But indeed, it is preventive. It is to be distinguished from therapies that actually will treat the illness. And there have been a few that have been studied. But I really believe that the vaccines are the most effective that we have right now to prevent the disease complications and to prevent the disease resulting in death. That's the best part of the story that I'd like to leave us with, and that is it reduces deaths and reduces severe complications, and in fact does lower the incidence of even mild infection.
Thank you, Dr. Reese. All right, in an interest of time, we want to respect your time this evening. We want to remind you that if you had a specific question that maybe wasn't answered, feel free to reach out, look at our resource page there at ellicotcity.church/vaccine. We also wanted to remind you that there are there's a questionnaire. Sorry, thank you. There's a questionnaire, a quick survey question, 3 questions. If you could fill those out, we can continue the discussions. What is your need? How can we continue to help you? All right, at this time, we're going to ask Pastor Macena to close us out with a word of prayer.
All right, so thank you very much for everyone's participation. I just, before pray, thank you for every one of you. Thank you, Pastor Debbie and the team for putting that together. There is this short phrase in Proverbs 2:11 that says, wise choices will watch over you, and understanding will keep you safe. And you guys gave us a lot of information today to keep us safe. I was vaccinated today, actually, Pfizer, and, thank God for the opportunity. Yes, I got my first shot today. So, and thank you guys for the great information you share with us today, with our community. I invite you to pray with us at this moment. Heavenly Father, we come before your presence, Lord, knowing that you are always watching over us. And we thank you for the wisdom you have been giving to these doctors and specialists and every one of them, that they are helping us to get this vaccine to help us to be safe. We thank for everyone's participation tonight. We thank for those who are watching us today. May your Holy Spirit guide and protect each one of them. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.